Some battles drag on for months or even years, but there are rare moments when everything is decided in the span of hours. The Battle of Mohács was one of those moments. In just 2 hours on a sweltering August day in 1526, the Kingdom of Hungary was broken and its independence lost. The clash was brief, yet it reshaped the destiny of an entire nation for centuries to come. It was a lightning strike in history. It came fast and left scars that have never completely faded. Hungary stood at the crossroads of Europe, and for centuries had been a bulwark against the advance of the Ottoman Empire. But by the early 16th century, the kingdom was weak, fractured, and vulnerable. Its nobles bickered among themselves. Its once legendary armies had been disbanded, and its young King Louis II was only 20 years old when the storm finally arrived. That storm was led by none other than Sultan Suleiman, known as Suleiman the Magnificent to the west, and as the lawgiver to his own people. His empire stretched across 3 continents, and he commanded the most advanced and disciplined military machine of the age. By 1526, his gaze was fixed squarely on Central Europe. Hungary stood in his way, and he intended to sweep it aside. The Hungarians knew what was coming, but they were divided on how to respond. Some of the king's commanders urged caution. They advised falling back, linking with reinforcements, and waiting for a better chance to fight. But the proud nobles of Hungary had other ideas. They believed in the unstoppable power of their heavy cavalry, the armored knights who for centuries had been the terror of European battlefields. They demanded an immediate attack, certain their charge would shatter the Ottomans. To them, retreat meant cowardice and dishonor. The young king, caught between factions and pressured by the aristocracy, finally chose battle. The armies met near the town of Mohács on August 29th, 1526. The Hungarian host numbered around 25 to 30,000 men, with perhaps 85 cannons. It was not a small army, but it was hopelessly outmatched. Facing them was an Ottoman force at least twice their size, with more than 3 times the artillery, and with the finest soldiers of the age, the janissaries. The battlefield itself seemed favorable at first glance. The Hungarians took up position on an open plain, bordered by the Danube River with marshy ground scattered throughout. They believed it was perfect terrain for a massive cavalry charge. In reality, it was a trap waiting to be sprung. The Hungarian battle plan was simple and bold. The heavy cavalry would smash into the Ottoman center in a thunderous frontal assault. Once the enemy line broke, the rest of the army would pour through and deliver the killing blow. It was the kind of strategy that had worked in the past for medieval knights, but the Ottomans were not a medieval enemy. They were a modern, disciplined force with firearms, artillery, and a flexible, layered defense designed for exactly this situation. Suleiman and his brilliant Grand Vizier, Ibrahim Pasha, deployed their army in 3 deep lines. At the front, they placed irregular troops who could absorb the initial shock and then retreat. Behind them stood the Anatolian infantry, supported by chained artillery pieces that created a solid wall of firepower. And behind all of them lay the true core of the Ottoman host, the janissaries and the Sultan himself with his elite guard ready to strike the final blow. When the battle began in the hot afternoon sun, the Hungarians launched their great charge. Archbishop Paltamori led the heavy cavalry forward. Thousands of armored men and horses thundered across the plain, their lances lowered, their banners flying. They crashed into the Ottoman front line, and at first the result seemed miraculous. The irregular troops broke and fled. Dust and cries filled the air as the Ottomans appeared to collapse. For a brief moment, it looked as if the proud knights of Hungary would carry the day, but the apparent victory was a deadly illusion. The flight of the first line was not a panic, it was a ruse. The Hungarian cavalry pursued them recklessly, their formation breaking apart as they galloped deeper into the Ottoman position. Some even stopped to loot abandoned tents, believing the enemy defeated. Instead, they had ridden straight into a killing ground. The second line of the Ottoman army stood waiting. Before the Hungarians loomed thousands of janissaries drilled to perfection and armed with muskets. Between them were rows of artillery pieces aimed directly at the advancing knights. The trap snapped shut. At a signal, the janissaries knelt in rows and unleashed disciplined volleys of gunfire. Bullets tore through steel armor and flesh alike. Knights who had believed themselves invincible toppled from their saddles. Almost simultaneously, the artillery roared point-blank into the packed Hungarian ranks, blasting holes through men and horses alike. The charge stalled. The proud cavalry found themselves bogged down in the marshy ground, weighed down by their armor and cut to pieces by gunpowder weapons they could not overcome. As the center faltered, the Ottomans unleashed the final phase of their plan. Light cavalry known as akinji swept around the flanks and struck the Hungarians from behind. Encircled, hammered by cannon fire and musket volleys, and cut down by swift horsemen, the Hungarian army dissolved into chaos. Courage gave way to panic. Soldiers broke ranks and fled, but there was nowhere to run. Within less than 2 hours, the Hungarian force was annihilated. Thousands lay dead. Among them were much of the kingdom's nobility, bishops, and barons. The young king himself tried to escape, but his fate was no less tragic. As Louis II attempted to cross a stream, his wounded horse stumbled and threw him into the water. Weighted down by his armor, he drowned at just 20 years of age. With him drowned the independence of Hungary. When the smoke cleared, Suleiman surveyed the carnage. He was said to be astonished that such a small force had been sent to oppose him. 2,000 prisoners were executed. The battlefield was a graveyard not only for men but for a kingdom. In the aftermath, the Ottomans marched on the capital Buda. The city surrendered without resistance. It was looted, its palace stripped of treasures, and tens of thousands of captives carried away. Suleiman did not immediately annex Hungary, but the blow had already been struck. The death of Louis II without an heir created a succession crisis that tore the country apart. Two rival claimants emerged. One was John Zapolya, the governor of Transylvania, who had failed to bring his army in time for the battle. The other was Ferdinand of Austria, a Habsburg whose claim rested on his marriage to Louis's sister. Civil war erupted. Zapolya, unable to win alone, turned to the very power that had destroyed Hungary. He swore allegiance to Suleiman, becoming an Ottoman vassal. The result was the partition of Hungary. The western and northern regions fell under Habsburg control. The central lands, including the capital, became Ottoman territory. The east became a semi-independent principality of Transylvania beholden to the Sultan. This division lasted for more than a century and a half. What followed was devastation. Hungary became the battleground between two empires, the Habsburgs and the Ottomans. Towns were burned, crops destroyed, populations displaced. The land was ravaged by war and famine. Entire generations grew up in the shadow of foreign rule and constant conflict. The Battle of Mohács was not just a defeat, it was the destruction of a nation's independence. In a single afternoon, Hungary lost its king, its nobility, its army, and its freedom. The loss was so catastrophic that it entered the very language of the people. To this day, Hungarians say more was lost at Mohács as a way to put lesser troubles in perspective. The battlefield itself is now a national memorial park. It stands as a solemn reminder of the dangers of arrogance and division. The nobles who insisted on reckless battle, the disunity of the realm, the failure to modernize all played into the hands of a master strategist like Suleiman. The lesson of Mohács is harsh but clear. Internal division can be deadlier than any enemy. Overconfidence and outdated methods can blind leaders to new realities. And once a critical mistake is made, history can change in an instant. On that August day, Hungary gambled everything on a cavalry charge. In 2 hours, the gamble was lost, and with it a kingdom that had stood for centuries. The echoes of that defeat would shape Central Europe for generations. It was more than the death of an army or a king. It was the end of an independent Hungary and the beginning of a long, dark chapter under foreign domination. The Battle of Mohács remains a cautionary tale. It shows how the seeds of disaster are often sown long before the battle itself. The divisions within Hungary, the weakening of royal power, the arrogance of nobles, and the failure to adapt to new ways of war all ensured that when the clash finally came, the kingdom would not survive. The 2 hours of combat were only the final act of a tragedy that had been unfolding for years. What was lost at Mohács was not merely soldiers or territory, but the very idea of a unified Hungarian kingdom. That wound cut so deep that it shaped the identity of the nation for centuries and still resonates today.